Look around a modern city. Steel towers climb into the sky. Trains slide along steel rails. Factories hum at the edge of town. Wires carry electric light into every room, and machines make more things in a single day than an old village could make in a year. We think of this world as new, clean, digital, but almost all of it was built during an age ruled by a single dark material, a black rock, pulled out of the ground and set on fire. It didn't look powerful. It looked like a dirty stone. Yet this rock helped raise cities, drive engines, forge iron, move trains, and light up the night. So here is the mystery. How did a black rock, buried deep underground, become powerful enough to reshape human civilization? The answer runs through flooded mines and roaring furnaces, through steam engines and speeding trains, through crowded factories, children working in the dark, smoke-filled skies, and finally, electricity. This is the story of coal, the rock that built the modern world. A rock that burns coal is not a modern discovery. Long before factories or trains, people already knew that certain black stones would burn. In places where coal lay near the surface, it could be picked up from a hillside or a riverbank and thrown straight onto a fire. Ancient communities used it here and there. Some burned it for warmth. Some used it to dry grain or heat metal. The knowledge was real, but it was scattered. A local trick, not a world-changing force. Which raises a strange question. If humans knew about coal so long ago, why didn't it change the world sooner? The answer is that a lump of coal, by itself, changes nothing. Coal only becomes powerful when many things line up at once. You need people who require huge amounts of fuel. You need deposits you can actually dig. You need a way to pull coal out of the ground. You need a way to carry it to where it's needed. And you need machines that can turn its heat into useful work. For most of history, those pieces were missing. Wood was usually easier to reach. Villages were small, and there were no great engines waiting to be fed. So coal stayed in the background, known but sleeping. It would take a very particular place with a very particular problem to finally wake it up. That place was Britain, running short of fire. For a long time, the main fuel was wood. Wood warmed homes and cooked food. Turned into charcoal, it burned hot enough to melt and shape metal. Whole industries leaned on the forest. But wood has a limit. As towns grew and people multiplied, they needed more heat, more timber for building, and more charcoal for making iron. Forests near the busiest cities were cut faster than they could grow back. Wood didn't vanish, but in the crowded places, it became scarce and expensive. It's tempting to say Britain simply ran out of trees. That's too simple. What really happened was a slow squeeze. In the most crowded regions, especially around London, fuel prices climbed. And at the very same time, Britain happened to sit on enormous beds of coal, some of them close to the surface, close to rivers, close to the sea. So people did the practical thing. They switched. Coal began heating homes and workshops. Smoke thickened over the rooftops. Coal moved by cart, by barge, and by coastal ship to feed hungry markets. Slowly, coal stopped being a strange alternative and became a basic need. And once a country runs on coal, it always wants more. The easy coal near the surface got used up first. To reach more, miners had to dig deeper. And the deeper they dug, the more they met an enemy waiting in the dark. Water. Dig deep enough, and the mine floods. Coal was now essential, but the earth itself seemed determined to keep it locked away. To win it, Britain would need a new kind of machine. The mine creates the machine. Picture a deep mine, hundreds of feet down. The seams of coal are rich. The problem is the water. It seeps through the rock, pools in the tunnels, and creeps a little higher every day. Men can bale it in buckets or haul it up with horses, but water never rests. Flood the tunnels, and the mine is dead. For a while, this set a hard limit. You could only dig as deep as you could keep dry. Picture the man in charge of such a mine, standing at the top of the shaft. Below him is a fortune in coal. He can see the seam, thick and black and waiting, but the lower tunnels are already filling. Every horse and every bucket he owns is losing the fight against the water. He is not beaten by empty ground. He is beaten by a flood he cannot pump out fast enough. And so the coal stays where it is, out of reach. All across the coal fields, the same story repeated. The coal was there. The water was in the way. Then came a machine that changed everything. In the early 1700s, an engine came into use that could pump water using the power of steam. It's tied to the name Thomas Newcomen. The idea was simple, but the results were enormous. Burn coal to boil water, use the steam to drive a piston, and let that piston work a pump. These early engines were huge, slow, and thirsty. They swallowed coal by the ton. But at a coal mine, fuel was the one thing you had in plenty. So it didn't matter that the engine was greedy. It kept the mine dry, and a dry mine could go deeper. Later, improvements linked to James Watt and others made steam engines far more efficient. They wasted less fuel and did far more work. And once steam could do more than pump, once it could turn wheels and drive other machines, it could power almost anything. Here is the heart of the whole story. Coal helped create the steam engine, and the steam engine helped humans dig out more coal. That loop is the engine behind everything that follows. More coal fed more steam engines. More steam power drained deeper mines. Deeper mines gave up more coal, and more coal built more machines. It was a loop that fed itself, and it was only getting started. Coal remakes iron. At first, steam and coal mostly worked underground. But coal was about to escape the mine and reshape the very material the modern world is built from: iron. Iron was already known and prized. The trouble was how you made it. To turn raw ore into usable iron, you needed intense, steady heat. And for centuries, that meant charcoal, made from wood. So iron making was chained to the forest. And the forest was shrinking. Why not just burn coal in the furnace instead? Because raw coal carries impurities that ruin the iron. The answer was to change the coal first. Baked in the right way, coal turns into coke, a light, hard, carbon-rich fuel that burns hot and clean enough for making iron. An important step is tied to Abraham Darby, who used coke to smelt iron at a place called Coalbrookdale in the early 1700s. It pointed the way toward making iron with coal instead of wood. This was far bigger than it sounds. Now iron could be made in large amounts, using a fuel Britain had in abundance. And iron is the skeleton of an industrial world. Iron became machines. Machines to spin thread, pump water, and cut metal. Iron became tools, bridges, rails, engine parts, and the frames of great buildings. Coal was no longer just keeping people warm. It was helping build the hard bones of a new kind of society. But there was a catch. You could now make mountains of iron and mountains of goods, yet all of it was heavy, and the world still moved at the speed of a horse. Making things was one problem. Moving them was another. The railway revolution. The solution came, once again, out of the coal mine. Long before passenger trains, mines used simple tracks to move heavy coal wagons. Wheels on rails roll far easier than wheels through mud, so carts piled with coal could be pulled along wooden or iron rails with much less effort. The tracks were already there. What they needed was a tireless engine to run along them. Steam provided it. Engineers put steam engines on wheels and built locomotives, machines that burned coal to move themselves along the rails, dragging heavy loads behind them. In the beginning, this was mostly about hauling coal out of the mining districts, but people quickly saw what else these iron horses could do. Through the 1800s, Britain laid down railway lines at astonishing speed. Tracks spread across the country, linking mines to factories, factories to ports, and towns to cities. The railways carried coal and iron and manufactured goods, and soon, enormous numbers of passengers too. Picture one of these trains crossing the country. A locomotive breathes out smoke and steam as a worker shovels in more coal, dragging a long line of wagons heaped with coal from a mine far away. Notice the loop again. Coal powered the locomotives, and the locomotives carried coal. The rock fueled the machine that delivered the rock. The effects rippled everywhere. Now coal could reach factories far from any mine. Goods could travel hundreds of miles in a single day. A factory no longer had to sit on top of a coal field because the coal could come to it. Distance itself began to shrink. Places that had felt far apart were suddenly a train ride away. Coal was pulling the whole country closer together and pouring fuel into a new kind of workplace that was about to swallow millions of lives. The factory. The factory world bring all the pieces together and you get the factory age. Coal burned to make steam. Steam drove engines. Engines turned long lines of machines under a single roof, working all day and all night, faster than any human hands. Before, most goods were made slowly, in homes and small workshops. Now production was gathered into huge buildings full of roaring, clattering machinery, and every machine traced its power back to coal. Towns swelled around the mines and mills. People left the countryside and crowded into growing industrial cities. Rows of brick houses went up in the shadow of tall chimneys, and smoke became the smell of work. From a distance, it looked like a miracle. More goods, more jobs, more power than any society had ever held. And behind all of it, quietly, sat the same black rock, burning day and night. But step closer, and a question rises up through the smoke. All this coal, where was it actually coming from? It didn't climb out of the ground on its own. Someone had to go down into the dark and cut it out of the rock by hand. To understand what coal truly cost, we have to leave the bright factory floor and climb down into the mine. Into the dark. Imagine stepping into a cage and dropping into the earth. The daylight shrinks to a dot far above you. The air grows warm and close. At the bottom, you crouch into low tunnels lit only by weak lamps, following the coal seam deeper into the dark. This was a whole working world, hidden beneath the fields and the towns. Down here, men called hewers swung picks at the coal face, breaking loose the coal that powered everything above. Others hauled it away. Children worked underground too, often hauling coal through cramped passages or operating the ventilation doors. Some children were hurriers, dragging heavy carts of coal along the tunnels. The youngest often worked as trappers, sitting alone in the dark for hours, opening and shutting the wooden doors that kept air moving through the mine. Think about that trapper for a moment. A small child, crouched in a hollow in the rock, in near total darkness. When a cart approaches, the child pulls a string. The door swings open, the cart rumbles through, and the door shuts again. Then silence. Then more waiting. Hour after hour, shift after shift, in the black, with the whole mine depending on that door being opened and closed at the right moment. And the hewer at the coalface worked in a different kind of hardship, swinging a pick in a space too low to stand, in heat and dust, tearing loose the coal by the muscle of his own back and arms. Every lump that fed a distant engine started with a blow like that. The dangers were everywhere. Water could break in and drown a tunnel, roofs could collapse without warning, and worst of all were the gases. Coal mines can release fire damp, a gas that explodes when it meets a flame. A single spark could turn a passage into a wall of fire. Even on a safe day, the work was brutal. Long hours, coal dust in every breath, bodies folded into cramped spaces, cutting rock by hand. This is the other half of the machine. Above ground, engines grew more powerful and factories more productive. But that power had a source. The reason the machines could roar louder was that human beings, down in the dark, were feeding them coal. The strength of the modern world was being carried up, basket by basket, out of these tunnels. Sooner or later, the people above ground would have to face what was happening below. The cost comes to light. For a long time, most people never saw the inside of a mine. The coal simply arrived. The The cost stayed underground. Then investigators went down to look. Reports began to describe what really happened in the pits, including the work done by women and by very young children, deep below the surface. When those descriptions reached the public, many were shocked. Out of that pressure came new laws. The Mines and Collieries Act of 1842 banned women and girls from working underground, along with boys under the age of 10. Later laws went further, adding inspectors and more rules to try to make the mines safer. It's a powerful pattern. Industrial growth created a human cost. The cost was exposed, and the exposure forced reform. But we should be careful not to tidy the story too neatly. The 1842 law did not fix mining. It did not end child labor everywhere, and it did not make the pits safe. Dangerous conditions carried on for a long time afterward. Explosions still killed. Progress came slowly, law by law, disaster by disaster. Still, something important had shifted. A society was beginning to admit that its comfort had a price, and that the people paying it deserved protection. And those people, the miners, were about to become something far more than workers. Around the mines, whole communities were taking shape, and communities, unlike lone workers, have power. A culture built on coal. A mine is not just a hole in the ground. Wherever coal was found, life gathered around it. When a colliery opened, workers came for the jobs. Around them grew houses, then shops, then schools and churches. Families settled in. Children were born who would one day go down the very same pit as their fathers. Take a place like Trimdon in the north of England. After its colliery opened, the local population grew dramatically. A quiet settlement became a coal town, its daily life shaped by the rhythm of shifts and the sound of the pit. Picture a family in one of these towns. The father works the pit, as his father did. His wages fill the corner shop and heat their own grate, and his children play in streets that exist only because the mine does. Their whole world turns around the pit. Across Britain, this happened again and again. Coal built more than machines. It built neighborhoods, traditions, and a shared way of life. Whole towns depended on a single mine. The pit paid the wages that filled the shops, the homes, and the church pews. That created a deep sense of belonging and a deep vulnerability. When an entire community leans on one industry, that industry becomes its lifeline. A cut in wages or a threat to the mine isn't just business. It reaches into every family in town. So coal was no longer only an economic force. It was becoming a social one, binding people together around the pit. And once so many lives depended on coal, control over coal became a kind of power worth fighting over. When coal became politics, miners did dangerous work for wages that often felt far too small for the risk. Naturally, they organized. They formed unions to bargain together, over pay, over hours, over conditions in the pits. And when bargaining failed, they could do something powerful: stop working. If the miners stopped, the coal stopped. And if the coal stopped, much of the country began to slow down. This tension boiled over in 1926. Disputes over wages, hours, and how the mines were run grew into a crisis. More than 1 million miners were locked out after talks broke down. For a time, workers across other industries joined them in a general strike, and much of Britain ground to a halt. The strike did not hand the miners a clear victory. Many were forced back to work on hard terms. But the event revealed something remarkable. Coal had become so central to the nation that a fight over coal could shake the entire country. It began as a stone that people burned for warmth. Now a dispute over who cut it, and for what pay, could stop a modern industrial nation in its tracks. Coal was no longer just a fuel. It had become politics, and its influence didn't stop at Britain's shores. Coal goes to sea. By now, coal was shaping power far beyond a single country. Industrial nations ran on energy. Coal gave them the strength to make iron and steel, to run factories, and to move ships and armies with steam. Steamships were a turning point. A steam-powered vessel didn't have to wait for the wind. It could hold a course, keep a schedule, and push against the current, as long as it had coal to burn. But a steamship can only travel as far as its fuel allows. So industrial powers set up coaling stations, places around the world where ships could stop and refill their bunkers. A chain of these fueling points stretched across the oceans, and whoever controlled them held an advantage. Control of the coaling stations helped control the sea lanes themselves. It's tempting to say coal built the great empires. That's too simple. Empire grew out of many things at once: money, ships, weapons, politics, and ambition. But coal strengthened the whole system. Industrial capacity, steam transport, and iron and steel, tied together by networks of fuel, gave industrial nations a powerful ability to move goods, people, and military force across the world. Coal had become geopolitical. The rock that once warmed a single hearth now helped drive the movement of nations. Yet even as coal reached its height, a quieter revolution was beginning, one that would let coal keep ruling while seeming to disappear. Coal learns to hide you. Might expect that as steam engines faded from daily life, coal would fade with them. Instead, coal found a new job, perhaps its most important one yet: electricity. The idea was clever. Instead of burning coal inside every separate machine, you burn huge amounts of it in one place: a power station. The heat boils water into steam. The steam spins turbines. The spinning turbines generate electricity. Then wires carry that electricity out across the land. This changed the relationship between people and coal. Before, if you wanted coal's power, you had to burn coal right there, in your grate, your engine, your furnace. Now the coal could be burned miles away, out of sight, while you simply flipped a switch. Britain built a system to move this electricity around, with large power stations often placed near the coalfields and lines, carrying the power toward the cities and industry. Picture a city at dusk, as the new electric lights come on. Windows glow, streets brighten, lamps flicker to life along whole avenues at once. To the people below, it looks like magic pulled out of thin air. Not one of them is thinking about coal. Yet miles away, a furnace is roaring, a fire is being fed, and somewhere deeper still, a miner is cutting the coal that keeps those lights burning. A lump of coal could now be burned far from any home, and the result would appear as light in a distant room. Here is the beautiful twist. Coal disappeared from the living room, but its energy moved into the walls. People stopped seeing coal. They stopped shoveling it, stopped smelling it in their own homes. Yet they depended on it more than ever, in a new and invisible form. Coal had learned to hide, but it could not hide everything. Above ground, the price of all this burning was being written across the sky. The sky pays the price for all its power. Coal was never clean. Every fire, every furnace, every locomotive and factory chimney poured smoke into the air. And in the great industrial cities, the smoke never really cleared. Soot settled on everything. It blackened buildings and stained the washing hung out to dry. Chimneys and fireplaces and engines together wrapped whole cities in a gritty haze. On bad days, the air itself could turn thick and choking. Picture a great industrial city at noon, and yet the sky is dim. Stone walls that were once pale have turned a permanent grey-black. For many towns, this was not a rare accident. It was simply the weather that industry made. For a long time, this was simply the price of progress. Smoke meant work. Smoke meant wages. A smoking chimney was a sign that things were being made and money was being earned. But slowly, the question began to change. For most of coal's story, the great challenge had been how to get more energy out of it. How to dig deeper, burn hotter, and power more machines. Now a new problem crept in. Not, how do we get more from coal, but what is all this coal doing to us? The smoke that meant prosperity also meant dirty lungs and darkened skies. The same fires that built the modern world were quietly changing the air that everyone breathed. That question, what coal costs, and not just what it gives, would grow louder with time. And it points us toward coal's final chapter. The long shadow step back and look at what coal did. For more than 2 centuries, coal powered an explosion of growth. It drove the steam, the iron, the railways, the factories, and the electricity that transformed how people lived. It helped lift whole societies into a world of machines and mass production that would have amazed earlier generations. But burning all that coal did something else too. Coal is rich in carbon. When it burns, it releases carbon dioxide into the air. Across 2 centuries of furnaces and power stations, that added up. Coal sits at the very center of the modern story of fossil fuel emissions, a cost that isn't paid in one spot, but shared across the whole planet. In time, some countries began to move away from it. In a striking reversal, Britain, the country most tied to the birth of coal-powered industry, closed its last coal-fired power station in 2024. The nation that helped launch the coal age switched off its final coal plant. Yet coal's story is not simply over. In many parts of the world, coal is still burned in vast amounts today. The rock that built the modern world has not fully left it. Closing. So return to where we began. Look around the modern city one more time. The steel in the towers, the rails beneath the trains, the factories, the power lines, the endless machine-made things all around you. So much of this world traces back to an age when nearly everything ran on a black rock dug out of the ground. And think about what that rock really is. Coal began as ancient plants, buried, pressed, and transformed underground over unimaginable stretches of time. Sunlight caught by living things long ago and locked away inside stone. Humans learned to unlock it. And with that sudden, concentrated flood of energy, they built steam and speed and iron and cities and light. But here is the last honest truth. Coal did not build the modern world by itself. People did. Engineers and inventors imagined the machines. Workers built them. And miners, men, women, and children, went down into the dark to feed them, often at a terrible price. Coal didn't build anything on its own. What it provided was energy, concentrated on a scale humans had never been able to command before. They used that energy to build a world that would have been almost impossible to imagine without it, along with consequences on the very same scale. That is why it earns the name, coal, the rock that built the modern world.